When I first met Sarah, my wife, she was the kind of woman who could walk into a room and make everyone pause. It wasn't just her beauty, although that certainly turned heads, it was her energy. Sarah had this infectious confidence, this vibrant smile that made you feel like the world wasn't so bad after all. I was smitten from day one. Back then, I was a different man, leaner, more self-assured, and, dare I say, ambitious. We met at a mutual friend's barbecue, and while others drank beer and talked sports, Sarah and I sat by the fire pit, talking for hours about life, dreams, and everything in between. By the time the evening ended, I knew I'd met someone extraordinary. Fast forward 10 years, and life was stable. Or so I thought. Somewhere along the way, the spark between us dimmed. I gained some weight after an injury sidelined me from my usual gym routines, and stress from my accounting job didn't help either. Sarah, on the other hand, seemed to blossom in her marketing career. Her social life expanded, and she always had a reason to be out, networking events, dinners, and recently, some fitness boot camp she'd taken an obsessive liking to. I noticed her growing distant, but I chalked it up to the routine grind of marriage. Every couple hits rough patches, right? But it wasn't just distance. Sarah's criticism of my weight became frequent. At first, it was playful, "Babe, maybe skip the fries today." But then it turned sharper, more cutting. It wasn't just the comments, it was the way she looked at me, as if I wasn't enough anymore. One Thursday evening, she came home later than usual. She barely glanced at me as she tossed her bag on the couch and headed straight to the shower. "Long day?" I asked, attempting to bridge the silence. "Exhausting," she replied curtly, shutting the bathroom door behind her. As I sat on the couch, scrolling through my phone, I couldn't help but feel a knot tightening in my gut. Something felt off. But I couldn't put my finger on it. Little did I know, this moment would be the beginning of a spiral that would unravel everything I thought I knew about Sarah, and myself. It started with small things, Sarah's phone. Once upon a time, it was an open book. She'd leave it lying around, notifications lighting up the screen, or hand it to me without hesitation if I needed to look something up. But lately, she'd become protective of it. She'd carry it with her everywhere, even to the bathroom. And when it wasn't in her hand, it was face down on the counter. I told myself I was overthinking it. People value their privacy, maybe she was just scrolling through work emails or catching up on social media. But the doubts in my mind were relentless. They whispered at night when I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling while Sarah typed away on her phone with her back turned to me. One Friday evening, Sarah dressed up more than usual. A slim black dress hugged her figure, and her hair cascaded in soft waves down her shoulders. She looked stunning, breathtaking, even. But there was a part of me that felt uneasy. "You look amazing," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "What's the occasion?" "Just dinner with some old friends," she replied, avoiding my eyes as she slipped on a pair of heels. "I'll be back by 10. "Which friends?" "Just some people from college. You wouldn't know them." Her response was casual, almost dismissive, but it struck a nerve. Sarah had never mentioned college friends before. I felt my throat tighten, but I forced a smile and said, "Have fun." After she left, the house felt eerily quiet. I paced the living room, trying to shake the unease. Then, almost impulsively, I opened my laptop. Sarah's phone habits had shifted, but her social media accounts were still accessible on our shared computer. I clicked on her Facebook messages, feeling equal parts guilty and desperate. Most of the conversations were mundane, the kind of chatter you'd expect, work updates, plans with friends. But then I saw a name I didn't recognize, Ryan. My heart sank. Their conversation was filled with flirty banter, emojis, and plans to meet up. The most recent message was just a few hours old. "Ryan, can't wait to see you tonight. I've booked something special. You're going to love it." Winking face. I sat back, my hands trembling. Who was Ryan? And why had Sarah never mentioned him? My mind raced with possibilities, each worse than the last. I tried to convince myself it was innocent, but the way she dressed, the secrecy, it didn't add up. Around 11:30, Sarah returned home, later than she had promised. She seemed flushed, her cheeks pink and her eyes sparkling in a way I hadn't seen in years. She kicked off her heels and poured herself a glass of wine, humming softly to herself. "How was dinner?" I asked, trying to sound nonchalant. "Fine," she said, taking a sip. "Just catching up, nothing exciting." I watched her closely. There was a lightness in her step, a smile playing at the corner of her lips. It was the look of someone who had been swept off their feet. But it wasn't a look she'd had for me in years. That night, as Sarah slept soundly beside me, I stared at the ceiling, the weight of suspicion pressing down on my chest. If she was hiding something, I needed to know. And if Ryan was more than just a friend, I had to face the truth, no matter how much it hurt. The next morning, Sarah was unusually cheerful. She hummed while making coffee, her mood light and unbothered. Meanwhile, I felt like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, one step away from falling into an abyss. I decided to test the waters. "You seemed really happy last night," I said, keeping my tone casual. "How was dinner with your friends?" She didn't miss a beat. "It was great. We talked about old times, shared some laughs. It was nice to reconnect." "Anyone I'd know?" She shook her head. "No, just some people from college. I don't think I've ever mentioned them before." Her nonchalance was almost convincing. Almost. But now that I knew about Ryan, her ease only fueled my frustration. How could she lie to my face so effortlessly? I spent the rest of the weekend quietly observing her. She spent more time on her phone than usual, her laughter soft but frequent as she scrolled through messages. I thought about confronting her outright but decided against it. If I was going to accuse her of something as serious as infidelity, I needed more than a hunch. That Monday, after Sarah left for work, I made a choice I never thought I'd make. I decided to follow her. Her job had flexible hours, so she often left the office during the day for meetings. That morning, I sat in my car parked a few blocks away, waiting for her to leave. It wasn't until early afternoon that she emerged from the office. Dressed in a sleek navy blazer and pencil skirt, she looked every bit the professional. But instead of heading to a client meeting or lunch with colleagues, she got into her car and drove across town. I followed at a safe distance, my heart pounding with every turn. She pulled into the parking lot of an upscale shopping center. My pulse quickened as I watched her get out of the car and glance around. Then, as if on cue, a man approached her. Ryan. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and well-dressed in a crisp white shirt and tailored slacks. They exchanged a warm embrace, the kind that lingered a moment too long, and then walked into a jewelry store together. My stomach churned. For nearly 30 minutes, I watched from the car as they browsed inside the store. At one point, the jeweler handed Ryan a small box. He opened it, revealing something I couldn't see, and Sarah's face lit up with a smile. She touched his arm affectionately before they both nodded in agreement. When they finally left the store, Sarah was holding a small bag, her expression radiant. Ryan walked her to her car, kissed her cheek, and waved as she drove off. I sat frozen in my seat, a mixture of rage and devastation coursing through me. By the time I got home that evening, Sarah was already there, casually flipping through a magazine on the couch as if nothing had happened. I couldn't bring myself to speak, so I retreated to the bedroom, my mind spinning with questions. Who was Ryan to her? What was in the bag? And how long had this been going on? One thing was certain, I wasn't going to let this go. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Sarah's breathing was steady, calm, as if she hadn't just spent her afternoon shopping for jewelry with another man. My chest tightened as I thought about the way she smiled at him, at Ryan, so openly, so warmly. It was a smile I hadn't seen directed at me in years. By morning, my resolve was set. If Sarah was hiding something, I needed to expose it. But I couldn't storm in blindly. I needed proof, something undeniable. Over the next few days, I carefully pieced together a plan. First, I installed a tracking app on Sarah's phone while she was in the shower. It was invasive, sure, but at this point, I felt justified. If she was betraying me, I deserved to know. Then, I called in a favor from my old college buddy, Todd. Todd was a private investigator who owed me for helping him out years ago. I gave him Ryan's name and described what I'd seen at the jewelry store. Find out everything you can about him, I told Todd. Work, personal life, anything. Todd didn't ask many questions. He simply agreed and got to work. In the meantime, I kept up appearances at home. I laughed at Sarah's jokes, kissed her goodbye in the mornings, and listened when she talked about her day. But inside, I was a storm of anger and heartbreak. Every time she smiled at me, I wondered if she was thinking about him. Every time she left the house, I wondered if she was meeting him. The first crack in her facade came just a few days later. That evening, while Sarah was cooking dinner, her phone buzzed on the counter. She didn't notice, I was sitting nearby, pretending to read, but I saw the name flash across the screen, Ryan. The message preview read, "I can't stop thinking about our time together. When can I see you again?" I felt my heart lurch in my chest. My hands clenched the edges of the book, white-knuckled and trembling. But I didn't react. Not yet. "Smells good," I said, forcing my voice to sound steady. She smiled over her shoulder. "It's your favorite, spaghetti and meatballs." As if that could make up for her betrayal. I nodded and went back to my reading, biding my time. Later that night, Todd called with his findings. "Ryan Mallory," he said. "Works in finance, divorced, no kids. He's been married once before, but it ended a couple of years ago. Seems like a smooth operator. He's got a reputation for dating women who are, let's just say, unavailable." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Ryan wasn't just a coworker or an old friend. He was a predator, and Sarah had willingly walked into his trap. "Did you find anything else?" I asked. "Yeah," Todd said, his tone hesitant. "There's something else. Ryan booked a reservation at an underwater restaurant for this Saturday night. It's one of those exclusive places where you have to reserve weeks in advance." My blood ran cold. That was 2 days away. Todd continued, "The reservation is for 2. I don't think I need to spell out who the other person is." "No," I said, my voice low. "You don't." After we hung up, I sat in silence, the pieces of the puzzle finally falling into place. Sarah had plans with Ryan, romantic plans. I could confront her now, demand answers, but a part of me wanted her to see the full weight of her actions. I wanted her to feel the regret and shame she clearly hadn't considered. If she thought she could play me for a fool, she was wrong. Saturday came quicker than I expected. Sarah was giddy all morning, humming as she flitted around the house. She claimed she had a girls' night out planned, an excuse so flimsy it almost made me laugh. She didn't bother hiding her excitement, though she tried to downplay it when I glanced her way. "Don't wait up," she said with a smirk as she put on her earrings. She was wearing a new dress, one I hadn't seen before, sleek, emerald green, hugging her in all the right places. It was the kind of dress that screamed "Notice me." "Of course not," I said, feigning a casual disinterest. Inside, though, I was seething. She had no idea I was already a step ahead of her. By the time she left, I was ready. I grabbed my phone and texted Todd. "She's on her way. You're sure everything's set?" A few moments later, he replied, "We're good to go." "You sure about this?" I hesitated, but only for a moment. Then I typed back, absolutely. The plan was simple. I'd show up at the restaurant with someone who would turn the tables on Sarah in a way she wouldn't expect. A part of me felt vindictive, but the other part, the hurt, betrayed part, just wanted her to see what it felt like to be blindsided. I'd reached out to an acquaintance, someone I knew Sarah would recognize instantly. Her name was Elise, a stunning fitness instructor I'd recently started working with at the gym. Elise was more than willing to help me out when I explained the situation, especially after I told her how Sarah had been stepping out on me. "You deserve better," Elise had said, and for the first time in a while, I almost believed it. When I arrived at the restaurant that evening, Elise was waiting for me outside. She looked absolutely radiant, dressed in a deep blue gown that turned heads even in the upscale crowd. "You ready for this?" she asked, flashing a confident smile. "As ready as I'll ever be," I said, offering her my arm. Inside, the restaurant was breathtaking. The dining area was submerged beneath a giant aquarium, the walls and ceiling made of thick glass that showcased schools of colorful fish and graceful stingrays gliding overhead. It was the kind of place Sarah would have loved, romantic, extravagant, unforgettable. And then I saw her. She was seated at a table near the center, laughing at something Ryan had said. He leaned in close, his hand resting lightly on hers as they talked. My stomach twisted, but I kept my composure. This was exactly what I expected, and now it was my turn to act. I guided Elise to a table in direct view of Sarah and Ryan. As soon as we were seated, Elise played her part perfectly, leaning in close to me, her laughter ringing out just enough to draw attention. I could feel Sarah's eyes on us within minutes. When I glanced up, our gazes met. Her expression froze, shock, confusion, and something I couldn't quite place flashed across her face. She quickly turned back to Ryan, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way she fiddled with her napkin. Elise leaned closer to me, whispering, "She's definitely noticed us." "Good," I muttered, a faint smirk tugging at my lips. As the evening progressed, I made no effort to hide my enjoyment. Elise and I shared a dessert, her laugh filling the air as I fed her a bite of chocolate mousse. It was petty, sure, but after what Sarah had done, I couldn't help myself. Finally, Sarah couldn't take it anymore. She stood abruptly, leaving Ryan mid-sentence, and marched over to our table. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes flashing with barely contained anger. What is this?" she hissed, her voice low enough to avoid making a scene but sharp enough to cut. I looked up at her, feigning surprise. "Sarah. I didn't know you'd be here. What a coincidence." Her eyes darted to Elise, who smiled politely but said nothing. "Who is she?" Sarah demanded. "Elise," I said calmly. "She's a friend." Sarah's face twisted in disbelief. "A friend? Really? You're out here on a date while I'm—" She stopped herself, realizing she was dangerously close to admitting too much. "While you're what?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. "Enjoying a romantic evening with your friend Ryan?" Her face drained of color. You knew." I gave her a cold smile. "Of course I knew, Sarah. Did you really think I wouldn't figure it out? You've been careless." Behind her, Ryan was staring at us, clearly uncomfortable. Elise finally spoke, her voice smooth and composed. "You must be Sarah. I've heard so much about you." Sarah turned to Elise, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for words. Then, without warning, she whirled back to me. "You've been spying on me." "I've been watching," I corrected. "There's a difference. But honestly, Sarah, you did most of the work for me. The late nights, the texts, the lies, did you think I wouldn't notice?" Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might lash out. But then her eyes flickered to Ryan, who was now awkwardly pretending to look at the aquarium. She straightened, smoothing her dress as if trying to regain control. This isn't over, she said, her voice icy. You're right, I replied, my voice just as cold. It's not. But it's not going to end the way you think it will. As she stalked back to her table, I felt a strange mix of triumph and sadness. This wasn't the resolution I wanted, but it was the one she had forced on me. Wow, Elise said softly, breaking the silence. That was intense. I nodded, my eyes following Sarah as she sat stiffly across from Ryan. It's only the beginning, I said. Sarah didn't stay long at the restaurant after our confrontation. She and Ryan left abruptly, but not before exchanging a few heated words. I watched them go, my mind a storm of emotions, anger, betrayal, and, strangely, a hint of relief. The ride home with Elise was quiet. She didn't cry, for which I was grateful. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I felt like I'd aged a decade in just a few hours. Inside, I found Sarah waiting in the living room, her arms crossed and her face twisted in fury. You humiliated me, she spat. I dropped my keys on the counter. You humiliated yourself, Sarah. You think I didn't notice the lies? The secret texts? Ryan? Her anger faltered, replaced by a flicker of guilt. It wasn't what it looked like. I let out a bitter laugh. Don't insult me. I saw enough to know exactly what it was. She stood there, silent, as the weight of her actions hung between us. Finally, I spoke again, my voice calm but firm. This marriage? It's over. I'll be meeting with a lawyer on Monday. Her eyes widened, panic flashing across her face. You can't just throw everything away. You already did, I cut her off. You chose him, Sarah. Now you can deal with the consequences. I walked past her to the bedroom, leaving her standing there, speechless. For the first time in years, I felt a strange sense of clarity. The days after our confrontation were tense. Sarah oscillated between apologetic and indignant, but I refused to engage. The reality of her choices seemed to sink in as I moved forward with the divorce proceedings. I met with a lawyer and laid everything out, her infidelity, the messages, and the public scene at the restaurant. Sarah tried to bargain, even suggesting counseling. We can fix this, she pleaded one evening, tears in her eyes. But I shook my head. This wasn't a mistake, Sarah. It was a choice you made over and over again. Then came the twist I didn't see coming. A few days later, I learned from Todd that Ryan wasn't just any guy. He had a history of exploiting women in relationships and was tied up in some shady financial dealings. Todd found evidence suggesting he'd been using Sarah not just for companionship but potentially as a way to access her father's business contacts. When I confronted Sarah with this information, she was stunned. Ryan wouldn't do that, she insisted, but her voice wavered. He already did, I said flatly. And now, thanks to him, you've jeopardized more than just our marriage. Your father's business is at risk. She fell silent, the weight of her actions crashing down on her. For the first time, I saw genuine regret in her eyes, not just for what she'd done to me, but for the mess she'd dragged herself into. Sarah's regret quickly turned into desperation when she realized just how deep the consequences ran. Her father's business, a family-owned enterprise she had been so proud of, was now on the brink of collapse. Ryan had charmed his way into her life and, through her, into her father's trust. Deals had been signed, and money had changed hands, money that Ryan had siphoned into shell companies before disappearing. You need to help me, Sarah begged one evening, tears streaming down her face. If you don't, my dad's business will go under. I looked at her, a woman I barely recognized anymore. Why would I help you, Sarah? You didn't care about protecting this family when you were sneaking around with him. This isn't just about me, she argued, her voice breaking. It's about my dad. He'll lose everything. I considered her words. Despite everything, I didn't want her father to suffer for her mistakes. But I wasn't going to make this easy for her. "I'll help," I said finally, "but on my terms." Over the next few weeks, I worked tirelessly with my lawyer to untangle the financial mess Ryan had left behind. It wasn't easy, but we managed to salvage what we could. Meanwhile, I made sure Sarah understood that this wasn't an act of forgiveness. "You're going to pay for this," I told her. "Not just financially. I want full custody of the house, the savings, and no alimony. If you fight me on any of it, I'll expose everything, Ryan, the affair, all of it." Her face went pale, but she nodded. "Fine," she whispered. "You can have everything. Just please, don't ruin my dad." When the divorce was finalized, I walked away with a clean break, no ties to Sarah and full control of our shared assets. She, on the other hand, was left to pick up the pieces of her life and her father's business. The day I moved out of what used to be our home, I felt a strange sense of relief. Sarah stayed inside, watching from the window as I loaded the last of my boxes into the car. She didn't say a word, and I didn't either. There was nothing left to say. For weeks, I'd thought the pain of her betrayal would haunt me forever, but as I drove away, I realized it wasn't the pain that lingered, it was the lesson. Trust is fragile. Love is conditional. And sometimes, the person you build your life around isn't who you thought they were. I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I reconnected with old friends, hit the gym with a renewed focus, and even started working with Elise on a fitness program. She became a surprising source of encouragement, though we kept things strictly friendly. I wasn't ready for more. Not yet. Sarah, on the other hand, wasn't faring as well. Through mutual acquaintances, I heard her father's business had stabilized, but only after they'd been forced to sell off assets to recover from Ryan's fraud. Sarah had lost her job in the fallout, her once bright reputation tarnished. One day, she called me. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Hey," she said softly, her voice shaky. I wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything." I stayed silent, letting her words hang in the air. "I was selfish," she continued. "I didn't see what I was doing to you, to us. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know how much I regret it." Her apology was sincere, but it didn't change what had happened. "I hope you find what you're looking for, Sarah," I said quietly before hanging up. For the first time in months, I felt free. Months turned into a year, and life slowly settled into a new rhythm. I focused on myself, mentally, physically, and emotionally. The weight I'd been carrying for so long, both figuratively and literally, began to lift. My workouts paid off, and I dropped over 50 pounds, reclaiming not just my health but my confidence. One evening, I ran into Elise at a local coffee shop. She was as radiant as ever, her smile warm and inviting. "Well, look at you," she said, glancing me up and down. "You're a completely different man." "Thanks," I said, feeling a blush rise to my cheeks. "I owe you for getting me started." We talked for hours, laughing and sharing stories about our lives. For the first time, I felt something stir in me that I hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Hope for a future that wasn't defined by betrayal and regret but by new beginnings. As for Sarah, I heard less and less about her as time went on. The chapter with her felt like a distant memory now, a part of my life that had taught me lessons but no longer defined me. One day, while on a run by the waterfront, I stopped to take in the view of the setting sun. The air was cool, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink. It struck me how far I'd come, not just physically, but emotionally. Sometimes, the hardest moments in life aren't there to break you, they're there to rebuild you. And as I stood there, feeling the breeze on my face, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving.